So I am delighted to introduce Pamela. She is a licensed architect and co-founder, director emerita of Seattle's Gage Academy of Art. Pamela Belyea added professional griever to her credentials after losing 6 family members in 15 months. In response, Pamela conceived of the Griever's Library as a free bibliotherapy resource for the bereaved, offering book boxes stocked with grief books around Seattle, as well as unique online resources. Pamela is committed to keeping the Griever's Library refreshingly non-commercial. The project is 100% volunteer-run and supported through the gifts and talents of many compassionate businesses and volunteers. And everything on that table there, and being staffed by one of Pamela's board members, it's for you to look at and to take as it appeals to you. So, if there's something you've always wanted to know about how men grieve differently, or what happens when there's the loss of a child or there's a suicide, it's a great opportunity to begin to kind of start understanding in a way that can be very helpful. So I encourage you to spend time at the table, and Pamela will be there to talk about it afterwards. So I'm not going to take up more time than to say, please do ask questions. Pamela's going to explain about what's on your chair that you hopefully didn't sit on a pen, and she'll explain it. And looking forward to a wonderful time. When you ask questions, as Leslie said, try to keep them with a question mark at the end, and I've been known to be in situations where somebody got up and they sort of started to lecture, and the whole audience said, ask your question, ask your question. So the audience took care of it for me. So anyway, I'm delighted to welcome Pamela Belyea.
All right, let's move this. This is yours, Leslie. Wow. Now I know what they mean by saying you can't see anyone. I can't see anyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Well, hello. I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to talk about a topic tonight that no one talks about. In fact, I've been thinking about it, and people who are dealing with grief, I'm going to check in with a few of you in a minute. I think we are the 21st century lepers. No one wants to have anything to do with us because we're dealing with one of the most uncomfortable emotions that no one talked to us about before we met grief somewhere in our lives. And do you remember it in your high school health class, anyone? No. Did somebody put up their hand? High school health class? Yes? Wow, you must be younger than me, because it didn't happen in Canada in 1970. So one of the things I'm going to do tonight is we're going to explore grief together. We're going to look at how it's defined, what the scientists say, what the sociologists say, what creative projects have come out of the compost of grief. But I have to begin by explaining to you, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a social worker, I'm not a therapist, I'm not going to recommend any therapies. I'm just a companion or a compadre in grief with anyone here who is also dealing with the loss of a loved one. So I'm sticking to loss of a loved one. People have dealt with many losses. You've lost your home, you've lost your marriage, there are many ways that people have dealt with loss, but tonight I'm going to be specifically talking about loss of a loved one when I jump into this grief conversation. So I'm going to begin by saying that the title tonight is Living After Loss, Grieving, Healing, and Connecting. And we already learned a long time ago that Kubler-Ross's definition of grief, those 5 things, I have a hard time remembering them, but I'm going to tell you: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. We're told it's not linear. And that's right, it's not linear. It doesn't include everything, but what's really interesting is these 3 verbs for people who are going through this are all interconnected. I tried to give you a talk tonight about grieving, healing, and connecting. And you can put up your hand halfway through and say, that's not healing, that's grieving. That's not connecting, that's healing. Because when we're grieving, we're healing. When we're healing, we're we're often connecting. We're in a circle of all of these verbs that have to do with our experience of loss. So last weekend, I went to a conference led by teens on teen grief, and on the table beside me, someone had a definition of grief, which I thought was the most concise, and I'm going to use that tonight. It says, it's the natural reaction to the death of a person we love. This is for children, so it's got to be easy. People we care about or who played an important role in our life. It can impact our emotions, our thinking, our body. We know that. It's mental, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's physical. It has no specific timeline or stages. We're back in the circles and the lines and the leapfrogs of what's going on with me. It's different for everyone. And I'm going to talk, it's going to be a very biased talk. I'm going to include my experiences without personalizing them. And I'm a woman. Oh, okay, gender assignment right here. But many men will grieve very differently than me and maybe have felt it very differently than me. But the final thing that's really important, grief is not a disease. It's not a sign that someone is not strong or healthy. I thought this was terrific, the shortest definition I'd seen. But what's interesting is when we talk about trying to heal from grief, we're using a term that sounds medical. It suggests we have a pathological problem. So I guess I need to start using this clicker. Oh, I have a little question. Is there anyone here, put up your hand, I might see you, but I won't know who you are. Is there anyone here who would call themselves freshly grieving? Okay, we have a few. Now I'm going to ask the next question. Have you been grieving for less than 3 months for this loss? Put up your hand. Oh, you're fresh. But now the last question that's going to sound ridiculous. Have you been grieving for less than 3 days? No. Do you want to know why I asked that question? In the United States of America, if you have lost a family member, you get 3 days off to bereave. And so that means they think you're ready to go after 3 days. And for all the people here who are freshly grieving, you know that has nothing to do with your grief experience. Someone might say they were able to do it. I know a few people who went right back to work because they needed something. So I'm going to begin by saying this nice quote I just saw. When we are grieving, we don't need platitudes. We need metaphors. And so we're going to look at metaphors. We're going to look at stories. But the first slide is, let's see where we got here. My version of grieving. Does anybody know this painting? It's Picasso's Weeping Woman. When you have finally met grief, I want you to know, I think that is one of the most profound portraits of grief. And that's why I picked it. So we're going to start with the grieving. And I'm going to talk about what I think happens. I've said this in front of people. I say, for me, okay, Pamela, how do I say this? Finding out that someone you love has died is like finding yourself driving down the road, hitting a wall at 65 miles an hour, waking up in an ICU unit with no nurse, no doctor, and no painkillers. And I said that to a grief support group, and they said, yeah, and no arms and no legs. I thought, yeah. I mean, that's how bad it gets. It's very hard to get past the pain. But for me, the other thing that I felt in my deepest and freshest grief, I thought someone had parachuted me into a wilderness, didn't give me a map, and didn't give me a way out. I didn't have a passport, I didn't have a visa, I didn't have a guide. And I have certainly read that metaphor in books, and maybe you have too. So this is China. I always saw it as Germany, the Bavarian forest, but this was a pretty good picture. So because you just heard I put a library together of books, I wanted to reference certain books. And the book that I wanted to start with is this one. Has anyone in this room seen this book? It's only 2 years old, but what makes it so exceptional is it's written by a woman who's a leading researcher in the field of clinical psychology and neurobiology. So she's looking at what happens to our brains when someone dies. We already know our heart is hurting. What happens to our brains? The book is beautifully written. It's got a lot of good information, but the big theme is that everybody in this room has a self-identity that is a construct. Your brain has constructed it. You know who your loved ones are. You know where you live. You know what you do professionally. You know how. You own all this information, and it allows you to know that you are Sam or Gary or Patty. That's who you are. And when you take one column out of the construct, it collapses. And what's interesting is part of the grief story in this book is you have to neurologically keep trying to figure out what happened. Everything's gone. Who you thought you were a mother, you had a mother, so for her, the word grieving is the process of healing. So grief is a defined emotion, but the process of grieving is that neurological reconstruct. And then, by the way, once you do the reconstruct, you're a new you. Everything's new. There's a new normal. There's a new family, probably. There's a new set of friends, maybe. So it's an interesting book, and the only thing that you will find sort of funny is she did a lot of the experiments with rats and Lego blocks. And when they took the Lego blocks away, the rats were really upset. Oh, do I go to the next one? Let's try it. So, Bearing the Unbearable. There are lots of books with these kinds of names, the unspeakable, the unbearable. Has anybody in this room read this book? Paula Becker has. I think this book is beautifully written, and it has 52 chapters, which makes it edible. You can eat it in bite-sized morsels. She has a PhD in psychology, and she's a major national grief person who shows up at your door when your community is in crisis. So she also teaches a class in Arizona called Traumatic Death and Grief. And she asks her students to do a creative art project. Do you want to do a creative art project around traumatic death and grief? So there's a recipe in the book by a college student. I'm going to read part of it, but it's so close that if anyone here has lived with grief, you're going to follow along. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. She gives you all the proportions, the tablespoons and the teaspoons. But your grief, these are the ingredients: disbelief, reluctance to say goodbye, excruciating pain, I think people know that one, brutal sadness, confusion, constant obsessing, yes, anger, substitute that for feeling misunderstood, agonizing guilt, embarrassment, loneliness, and a dash of untimely and needless. But the way you do it is you fill a large pot with tears. You use a mallet to pound the anger until tender. You spread the pain in the bottom of a dish. You lay it with anger, guilt, and shame. You place it in an oven at some outrageous temperature. You bake it until loneliness turns to intense longing, and you let it sit for a lifetime. Written by a college student. I thought that was mind-boggling. So now we're going to get on to a more gentle story, We have a book that I found in the Elliott Bay bookstore, a little book of self-care for those who grieve. And I found it on the wall of bestsellers. I didn't know that grief books could be, but the author is from Seattle, and she's sitting in the second row. And we have these very books are on the table. We have copies for you. They are lovely. But why they're lovely is they're really gentle. She just gives you permission to live through your grief on your own terms. But I'm going to read for you the page I liked a lot. So it's that picture. She has these beautiful pictures. So it's a picture of a shirt, right? Wear, carry, cradle, breathe your person's clothing, if you have it. His favorite shirt, the robe she wore, they're now transitional and sacred objects, relics. Surround yourself with them if that helps. And yes, I've worn my son's sweatshirts. Sometimes it helps to wear the same clothes every day, less to decide that way, and something constant and familiar. Allow yourself. So my only criticism of this is she didn't say, wear it to bed and wear it to bed again, because I think you can take it all the way with this particular idea. It's implied. So I'm going to move along to an illustration, because we're still in our big grief mode here. I'm sorry, I cannot remember the name of the illustrator, but does anybody here relate to this picture? Big, smaller, smallest. You're still carrying it around, but it's no longer weighing you to the floor. And if we have fresh grievers here who've never lived with grief, this is hard to know. This is very hard to know, that eventually it will not go away, but it will always be with you, which brings us to the next really cool illustration. My husband and I saw a grief therapist for couples. She gave this to us. So the top line says, that's what everybody thinks is happening for you. You got a big chunk of grief, and you know, it's just going to get smaller, and you're going to move on, right? And they're going to say, have you moved on? This is the story that I think is the truth. You have a big chunk of grief. You're immovable. You still have it, but slowly you begin to build something bigger around it. And I think there's a truth in that. It's not the same one that takes you to the ground, but it's something that you still carry. And carrying your grief is a verb that is used in many books. So, now, how many people went to the Donald Byrd choreographed performance of grief in January? I want you to know about this many people went. I was not going to go except for somebody bought me a ticket. It was probably the most painful performance I have ever seen. It was called Grief, but what it was a dance representing Emmett Till's mother at his open casket funeral in 1955, and her name is Mammy Till Mobley. And Emmett Till was the 14-year-old boy who whistled at a white girl, was abducted and brutally murdered. And so she did the morning singing, and the dance company did the universal dance of grief. And maybe there were 70 people in the rep. You've been to the rep. It's full of hundreds of people. But I think it's interesting that Donald Byrd would take on such a powerful and such a difficult creative project, which is what we're going to be looking at. So, here's another creative project. We've all seen the ghost bikes. Turns out that in 2005, 40 ghost bikes were actually placed in Seattle. The project started in 2002-ish in a couple of parts of the country. Do we still see ghost bikes? We still see them? Are they still being added to the street?
I'm not sure about that. In some neighborhoods, there's more than others.
Well, that's sad, right? In some neighborhoods, there are more than others. If you have not met a ghost bike, it is because you haven't been on a corner or a street where someone was actually seriously injured or killed on their bicycle by a moving vehicle. Oh, where'd it go? It's gone. It's a ghost. So, you know, I'm very interested in this talk to talk about how people memorialize or deal with grief or make something that helps us process grief. So the next picture is a spirit quilt. And it's a quilt made of all the denim clothing that my son wore by my identical twin sister, who's a quilter. And the reason I bring that up is she makes quilts of the clothing that people wore to give to the family. And in this case, she built his name into a very heavy denim quilt that's gorgeous to sleep under. So spirit quilts is another way for a family member to show their love, to share their love, and for you to keep the memories. Healing. So there is a Japanese traditional art form of collecting broken pottery shards and putting the vessel back together with a mixture of lacquer, powdered gold, powdered silver, or platinum. The concept is that the broken thing can be put back together and the broken thing can become more beautiful. And that's what we're hoping for as we put ourselves back together from a terrible loss. So they want to make it more beautiful and embrace the imperfections. Do other people in the room know kintsugi? Yeah? It's a beautiful tradition. And a tiny little anecdote that when I found out that I had lost my son, somebody gave me these heart-shaped shortbread cookies, which I kept buying. And I put them on a little plate that said blessings. And every day I had a cup of tea. And one day my husband broke the plate. I was so upset, but you want to know something? A little kintsugi later, I still use the plate. I give him points for that. Yeah, we have to get through these things. So Bob Baer is a local PhD thanatologist who's been teaching grief issues at Highline Community College. He just retired. But I really love this book. We have it over there, A Guide for the Bereaved Survivor. But at the very end, he asked this question: how do I know I'm getting better? You know, you're in the mud. You don't know how you're going to get out. How do I know? And I love a couple of his comments. So listen carefully. It doesn't hurt as much as it used to. He didn't say it's going to stop hurting. It doesn't hurt as much. I'm not searching as often for that familiar face, but you're still kind of looking around. I don't think of my loved one as often, and that's okay. He has about 30, but the next one's outrageous. I've noticed there aren't as many idiots on the freeway. And you have to realize how angry you are when you lose someone. It takes a long time to simmer that thing down to give everybody else a little more of a pass. But one of the last ones I think is really beautiful. I can reach out to help other people. And that kind of is the graduation ceremony from grief. You're still carrying it, but I say that people who've lived with grief, their compassion meter goes to 10. You can be there for other people. You can help other people. So when we saw our couples therapist, and you're feeling like life is impossible, she said something to me that I wanted to share with you. She said, yes, you will have a hole, but you will still be whole. And if you look at trees that have holes in them, they can grow really tall. So of course I went home and I found every picture of a tree with a hole in it because I'd never thought about it before. And you want to know something? Little furry things grow in there. It's even better, right? So I like the idea. We carry the hole, but we are still whole. whole. And what do we... Oh, so now I'm talking a little bit about this healing process. I started journaling. The first day I journaled, I did 10 pages. Once I got into a routine, it was 1 page a day. And I think at the very bottom it says, am I getting better, of that written page. But I loved these notebooks because they come from Japan. They're perfect bound, which means they open. They have beautiful clay-coated paper. But the front of the notebook is called Life. And that meant a lot to me. And I would tape things in and write things in, and I kept it going for about 9 months. And I just have to say, does anyone here journal? Are you doing it? It's a place to process. It's part of the healing. But I came up with this. See if you've done this one. I didn't do it for more than a month or two. I called it my coping calendar. And it's right back to, am I getting better? I printed out a computer calendar. I got 3 colored magic markers, black, blue, and yellow. Black, of course, was the worst. Blue was pretty sad, and yellow was supposed to suggest sunshine. Although I will tell you, the word okay was the best you could use. But you're going to see it's May. For me, I'm past the 3-month mark. There are still pure blackout days. And there's still blackout hours. Has anybody ever tried to do this? It's not a bad way to see how you're regulating, I think. And I'm not a therapist. We know that. So we're back to creative healing projects now. There was a fire in 2018 outside of Santa Barbara that then turned into mudslides because the landscape was so tortured. 1,500 people died in that community. And an artist named Daniel Ciano somehow got a group of people together and built a 7.5-foot high mailbox. You don't know how big it is because you can't tell. And on one side, it says letters of grief, and on the other side, it says letters of gratitude. And I think there's something really important about those two, because the reason you really suffer the loss of the loved one is because of so much they gave you. You actually loved them for all of those reasons. So there's a slot on each side. You can write a letter, you can put it in there, and they have public readings. And people can come and hear letters of grief, letters of gratitude. And of course, it's California. I think actors do it. I mean, it's pretty groovy, right? So that's a beautiful way of allowing people to, again, process, write, use words, share. And they saw it as both a healing and a connecting project. Now, I think it's interesting, this is totally related to it, the Postal Service for the Dead. And the woman who started this, she's in LA, she wanted to write a letter to her mother, but she didn't really know how to address it. So she came up with a P.O. box. You can mail your letters there, but she has a code. So if you write nothing on the back of the envelope, that means don't open it, I just needed it to get to you. If you put a heart on the back, her team can read it, do not publish it. And if you put a star on the back, you are welcome to publish it. There's an Instagram for the Postal Service for the Dead. And she thought it was a therapeutic outlet to help people process their grief in a very tangible way. Which actually brings me to the piece of paper that you're sitting on, because I asked you if you wanted to participate in writing 6 words, but I want you, if you do write 6 words, to put a mark or something on the back so I know it's okay for me to publish it on our website, which is something we'll get figured out. So if you'd like to, I woke up this morning, I knew what my 6 words were, but I'm not sharing them at all. But I got it down. So the Postal Service for the Dead leads me to the next creative grief project. And I wrote grief greeting cards, but her company is called greeting grief cards. So when I tried to look up her company, grief greeting cards are the condolence cards that Hallmark makes. When you look up greeting grief cards, her dad died, and she realized that she wanted to send him a birthday card. She has a card for if you're getting married to say, Mom, I wish you were here with me to walk, Dad, I wish you were here with me to walk me down the aisle. Mom, I just had a baby. So the greeting grief cards you could then send to the Postal Service for the dead. One's on the East Coast, she's in Philadelphia, and one's in LA. But they're coming from that inspiration to reach out to the person you lost and tell them, share with them, maybe something that you never got to see when they were alive. So I have a slide that says connecting. Does anyone recognize what's in that slide? Anybody? They're rose petals that fell off a climbing rose bush at your house, Elizabeth. And I looked down on the ground. I was gardening. That was my thing to get through grief. And I didn't know that rose petals were hearts. Did we know that? That's why we get them on Valentine's Day, I guess. So we're going to get into some spiritual books now. The first one, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, is Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief. It's a fairly complicated thesis with the 5 gates of grief, but I did find a quote that I really related to, and I'm going to share with you from this book written by Francis Weller. As we walk this path of grief, we need others to hold us, to see us, to acknowledge the truth of our experience, even when they cannot fully understand what we are feeling. Grief is an intensely interior process that can only be navigated in the presence of community. As one of my mentors said, this is a solitary journey we cannot do alone. And I use that as a prompt for my own bias, which I do think that grief support groups have one great value. I do a grief support group on Zoom, but you are in a room where everybody knows your pain, and everybody relates to what you're going through. And that is not typical of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and corporate meetings and restaurants. Nobody knows what you're going through. But in a room that's a grief support group, which may or may not work for some people, it is a way to be heard, to be understood, and you can cry your eyes out, and everybody knows what's going on. So as part of building the Grievers Library, and as part of trying to understand things, I read books by mediums. I don't know if anyone else has. I got to learn that a psychic is not a medium. The mediums talk to the dead, the psychics find your keys, tell you how your children are going to do in college. So the mediums tell the stories through your loved one, through their, when I read the stories in the books, they seemed a little extraordinary. There's a lot of, everything was positive and happy and comforting, but I thought, how real is this? So my lovely husband, Gary Fagan, said, I cannot talk about mediums unless I go see a medium. So a week ago, I did the research. I went on a Zoom call, Gary was there, and I met a medium. I said I wanted to speak to the dead. Gary said, I want to talk about my son. So we did the dive. I'm going to tell you 4 things about it because I'm not selling anything here. I'm going to tell you that it was mind-boggling, it was heartbreaking, it was beautiful, and it was profound. And I am still processing it, and I will not cry in front of you, but it's very hard not to. It was extraordinary to meet someone who spoke to us through our son with things that only we knew. It really was extraordinary. So, because I'm not a therapist, I can talk about mediums. They will not talk to you about mediums. But we're still on the connecting thing. And many people connect to signs. Do people in this room connect to signs? The coins, the feathers, the dates, the numbers. There's kind of a whole codifying set of signs that have been part of the story of grief. And the woman in this particular book called The Secret Language of the Universe, her pitch is to tell you they're out there, open up your eyes, and here's what you should be looking for. So it's a pretty interesting book. Somebody said, uncanny revelations and instances of unexplained synchronicity. And I will tell you, I had a few this week. They're also referred to as God winks. You know, something that you would not have expected. You're talking about your sister. She loves angel food cake. And the waitress says, you know, we have a little overbake today. Would you like the angel food cake? Like something like that. That's not the example that is in the book. And also songs. You turn on the radio, you're thinking about the person you love, and his favorite song is there. So they say, and I think this is true, they give meaning and connection in ways that make the grief easier to bear. You can carry your loss with more grace and less fear, and I love this, it softens the need to have our life plan go as planned. Because, by the way, I think that's one of the biggest lessons we learn. The plan is no longer the plan. This particular book, it's on the table. It came out this year. I think it's lovely and wise. She has a PhD in psychology. She lost her father and her husband within 3 months. And she tells a story that on her husband's anniversary, that would be his death anniversary, she wanted to have butterflies emerge. So she and her young son, bought the caterpillars and planted the milkweed and fed them every day and cleaned the frass. Now I know a word I didn't know. And then the caterpillars made the cocoons, and on her husband's anniversary, nothing happened. And she kind of thought, I had a plan, what's going on? And then she got into the next version. Oh, there is no plan. We have a plan, there is no plan. She looks at the cocoons, and she sees that they're wiggling like jays, and they're kind of funny. She says, well, my husband had a great sense of humor, and his name was Jonathan. So she starts seeing all the jays, and he's always late. Okay, it's starting to make sense. And out of the blue, a monarch butterfly flies to them, and here's this monarch butterfly, and her husband's last name was King. And she sort of got it. And I'm thinking, this is pretty cool, raising butterflies, but I don't think I can do it every day. But it's a beautiful story that sort of connects your expectations with works, what doesn't work, the signs, the synchronicities. But the book itself is beautiful. It's got space for you to read it. It's not a textbook. And I have some copies there. Okay, so here's another way to connect with the person you loved. You eat their food, right? They loved that pizza. My son loved cheesecake on his birthday. They have a favorite restaurant. Does anyone here connect to their loved one through food? Ah, we know food. Yeah, it's one thing that we can do. Now, the next connection is mostly mine. I don't know if anyone else here, does anyone else have a gardening connection to their loved one? Ah, well, the day I found out that my son had died, because it took me a while to find out, I went to Swanson's and I bought every bleeding heart plant that they sold. And I want you to know there are 4 colors. There's not just one. They're all in my garden. I got the forget-me-nots the next year. I put in the birth flowers. Do you know the birth flower of your loved one? Anybody here? Well, birth flowers are pretty special because that's a connection. And because I lost a son, I grow sunflowers. I grow big sunflowers, I have bouquets. That's my connecting flower. You might have a different one. And then, of course, the lily, resurrection, purity, love. Those are all very special flowers, and you might have a particular plant or flower or tree. I remember one woman I read somewhere, she planted a particular tree with sweet fruit because the person who died loved sweets. So that was the flower. That was the plant. So we're back to creative projects now about connecting. And I don't know how many people know about Kaze no Denwa, which is the phone of the wind, called by Americans the wind phone, right? So in 2010, a man named Itaru Sasaki, living in a little town in Japan, lost his cousin to cancer. He was a landscape designer, and he wanted a way to connect. And he put a phone booth in his garden, a little white one with windows, and he would go out there to share the thoughts with his loved one. And it was called the wind phone because it was disconnected, an old rotary, because he wanted it to go out into the wind. It's very beautiful and poetic. But the next year, they had the 9.1 earthquake with the 30-foot tsunami waves, and 15,000 people in his community died. He went out and found the phone booth in the water, brought it back, installed it, and as of the last reading that I have, 30,000 visitors have come to his garden to use his phone. And by the way, I have the book. I haven't read it yet. It's called The Phone Booth. Has anybody read this? At the Edge of the World. It's a very beautiful book written by an Italian woman who went and visited the Japanese family. So what's interesting, an American woman lost her daughter, and she put up a little wind phone and started cataloging wind phones in America. There are 200, but you need to know something. You put up a wind phone and a vandal takes it down. So her count gets muddied. Or you put up a wind phone and you don't tell her. She has a map on her website called My Wind Phones. She knows about, as of this month, 225 public wind phones. How many in Washington State? 6. The closest to us are Burien, SeaTac, and Whidbey Island. We also have Olympia, Union, and Whidbey Island, Olympia, Union. But we do have them, and I'm dying to make a wind phone, but I haven't found the rotary phone yet. They're hard to find. But I think it's a beautiful idea. Would anyone in this room go to a wind phone if you could get to one? Yeah. Well, we need, again, we're talking about connecting. Now, have you heard of the Before I Die wall? This is a beautiful project. It started in New Orleans in 2010. She had lost a woman in her life who acted like a mother, and she felt that she needed to do something. She's an artist. Her name is Candy Chang. And there was a really rugged house, so a few blocks away, just covered in plywood that had been abandoned. And she and some friends painted it chalkboard black. She made a stencil, and it says, "Before I die, I want to." And she felt that that would really open the conversation to people understanding that there was an expiration date, and maybe they had to think about what would it mean to no longer be here. And what's interesting is, so far, there are 5,000 of these walls in the world, in 75 countries, in 35 languages. But she gets unhappy if you don't like the word die, and you changed it to, "While I'm still alive, I want to." She feels the whole message, the meaning, the conversation, the community processing is, what do we have to do now? And do we have any in Seattle?
We did.
We did? Where was it?
I'll just say a number of years ago. Am I on? Yes. Yeah. A number of years ago, Horizon House and I'm trying to think, Freeway Park, we collaborated, my organization collaborated, and we had a wall up in Freeway Park that you could find, and people did fill them out. The chalk kept disappearing, but we kept resupplying it, and we took pictures of it. It went on for about 2 years, and then they took it down.
Well, Candy Chang said this wall was full the next day. That there's so much, and she says some people make a joke, some people get very serious, some people have really big things they want to do. Now, the next slide I'm going to show you, I think about the fact that it's really based on a 4-letter word that I love, that we should all love, and it's called hope. And I think that sort of needs to be in this conversation. We need hope. Has anybody in this room come across the survivor tree? It's an extraordinary story. After the World Trade Towers fell and they cleaned up all the rubble, they found a tiny broken pear tree. The trunk was totally burnt. The limbs were broken. Somebody lifted it from the ground and took it to a greenhouse that belonged to the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. 9 years later, it came back as a full-fledged tree, and you can see how beautiful that is, a flowering pear tree. It was put in the Memorial Park by the World Trade Center, which is already a beautiful way of showing the survivorship of the tree and of us and our communities. But they make seedlings from this tree, and every year they give 3 seedlings to 3 different communities that have lived with a horrible tragedy. And they've been doing this since 2013. And you can think of any community you've seen in the newspaper where you've thought, oh my God, how could anyone live through that? They have a survivor tree. And I just think it's poetic, it's beautiful, it's meaningful, and we're back to that 4-letter word. We need love, we need hope. We need them both. Oh, now we're on to my project. I had to do a creative project too, what can I say? This project came from being in a grief support group and having another member who lived in another community who couldn't get a book that I had. And I tried to imagine this is very whited out, so you can't quite see that map. I tried to imagine what would happen if we just put our books in real book boxes and other people could find them who needed hope, love, grace, connection, community. And so I started this project less than a year after my son died, which is kind of extraordinary. I've been working on it for about 4 years, 3.5 years. And the first thing I'm going to tell you about it that's sad is it's radioactive. Nobody wants a box near them. Nobody wants a box full of grief books in front of their coffee shop, in front of their community center. We're back to grief allergy, right? And I say it's a medicine cabinet for those who are suffering. We can give it to them. We have books for children. We have books for teenagers. We have books for military death, things that we need support with. So on that map, you're going to see we have managed to install 5 book boxes. The last one is in the University District, right beside UW. We installed it last Tuesday with 68 books, 68 books, and 2 days later, someone had vandalized the whole thing. The books were stolen. I guarantee it was not a griever. So we put some more books in. We're still at it. I said to the guy who's working with me, I said, we are resilient. We'll keep it going. We'll figure it out. It's right in front of the University Congregational Church of Christ at 45th and 15th. And I have not put the address on the website yet, but it is coming. But the other ones, there's one in the Crown Hill Cemetery. There's one in front of a bookstore in Kingston. These are on the website, and my business card and our bookmarks are over there. You can find how to find this. So this is an interesting part of the project, folks. So the Dewey Decimal System has number 155 for something called, have we ever heard of this? Differential and Developmental Psychology. That's where you're going to find the grief books, in case you were looking for them. Except for then you have to do 0.973. So when I went looking for grief books in the Seattle Public Library, I looked up grief. I got a mystery novel, I got a thriller. They had lots of books, but they weren't what I was looking for. It turns out you need the word bereavement. Bigger word, I hadn't thought of it. But then if you want a grief book for a child, it's fiction, and you gotta look for books about dogs and snails and bears, because they don't have grief books. They have books about dogs and snails and bears that die. So it's a tough thing. So what we did was, we took the concept of all the different ways people could get support through books, and we made a code that's up there. We have grief books, we have bereaved parent, we have bereaved spouse, we have bereaved youth, we have bereaved sibling, we have, parent loss. We have all the different ways people die. So we have books on overdose or cancer or traumatic sudden death. Those books are sitting over there. And then we have the spiritual books, which have silver dots. These all have dots. Then we have themed books, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist. You cannot find a Hindu grief book. We have the sticker, we've never found it. BIPOC, LGBTQ, and then we have for men, and we also have for pets, but it didn't fit on the chart. But we got them. So we created a secondary project, which was Easy Reads on the website. We took excerpts from books. We got permission from authors and publishers. So if you cannot get out of your chair, or you live in Wellington, New Zealand, or Johannesburg, South Africa, or Amsterdam, you can come in here and you can find parts of books that speak to you. And so Easy Reads is on the website, and so is something called Global. We have lists of grief books that you can find in your local library based on where you live. There's 2 billion titles in a database that we have cataloged into. Those are our 3 pieces. So this is my final slide. I've got another 4-letter word, which I think is the key to this all. We're not gonna make it without love. And these are my 3 thoughts. You are not crazy, even though nothing seems right. You will survive this, and you are not alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela.
Am I on?
Yeah. Are you on? Yeah. What an amazing project, and thank you so much for sharing it. How has this process been for you? It's an ongoing one, but as it's begun to go forward, and what are you hearing about people who get the books and find them helpful?
Well, first of all, I call this my compassion project. Some people have passion projects. So obviously, I'm doing this for grievers. And people who are in the business of being a griever totally get what I'm doing. They are very thankful. They're very acknowledging. Some people are very generous. They help support this, which, by the way, is totally volunteer run. And I have a little, what's it called, PSA? I desperately need on our volunteer team an IT expert who knows Wix dynamic pages. I'm throwing that out. We are in big trouble with that, but we have carpenters, we have cookie bakers, we have lots of people involved. We're missing an IT person. but everybody who's involved has been somewhere in this place with us. They feel us. It's amazing when you go to a lumber yard, you ask for 9 sheets of plywood for a griever's book box, and they just say, yeah, we're in. I mean, businesses, all of the businesses we've consulted, those book boxes are made by painting contractors, carpenters, lumber yards, Lowe's and Home Depot. You should have seen the guy at Home Depot when I asked for the piano hinges. You are a beautiful woman. Okay, thank you. We'll take 2 6-footers. It's been a great project. There are, I want to say, over 100 people have participated or donated. It's like it has its own little momentum. And the love is what keeps it going. That's truly what keeps it going. Because anybody in this game has lost love, needs love, knows love. It's a beautiful thing in a world that doesn't have enough love.
Thank you for that. And it makes it possible for people to talk about things that are so hard to talk about.
Oh, nobody's going to talk to you about grief. Come and see me if you want to talk about grief. If you want to come up and ask a question, you can come right up here. Can you get up here?
It has to be digitally or on the microphone.
Yeah. So let's do that. Just because I want to honor time, are there?
Love? I need an IT expert who knows Wix dynamic pages. We are lost. Dynamic?
Wix.
W-I-X. It's a website program, sure.
Right. So if you know anybody who is looking for purpose and they have that kind of technical skill, pass it on.
Yeah.
So I want to just say, just because we're running out of time, we have an opportunity to take questions. I don't know, are there any that came in on the... Okay, good. Anybody who would like to ask a question, please come up to the mic and ask us, and this is a great opportunity to do this.
I just wanted to ask, because I know someone who is dying of cancer.
Yes.
So, you know, you have a book for people who've lost someone to cancer. What about books to help?
There's a beautiful book on that table, believe it or not.
Great.
It's the only book marked cancer, and it was written by a man who loved a man who was dying of cancer, and he was also an author, and he really speaks to what he is going through, but it's beautiful. It's right there. I can't remember
For the person
who's dying. Yes.
The person who is dying.
You can
I'm
share.
talking about the person losing themselves.
You can share that book with them.
Thank you.
Right there on the table, and it was donated to us by the author. He sent us. Authors send us books. They want people to get help. They want to share the work that they've written. It's by Lawrence Seamus, I believe, but you will find it on the table.
Hi, I just wanted to point out today is the birthday of one of my, I don't want to say person I lost, but a person who died.
Yes.
So I thought that was a good omen that I'm here. And I wanted to point out one of the most moving experiences I've ever had, and then speak to the fact about this and get your input. I saw the AIDS quilt.
Yes.
And that was a grieving experience that I think really assisted people to face and live with grief. And that's why your quilt that your sister made really moved me. And I have found, and I wonder if is making things and doing things with my hands really helps.
I think anything that's an offering, either in memory of someone who died or an offering to someone who is suffering grief, it can be a tuna casserole. There was a book put out years ago called Does It Always Have to Be Tuna Casseroles? And it was supposed to be funny. I did not find it funny. But no, yes, making things, there are so many ways to do this. There's a book called Present and Present, I think. I'm close. And it's all the ways you can make things from and for the person you're grieving, you know, what you can do with the buttons, what you can do with the notebooks, it's crazy, all the ideas in there. But yes, making is part of our processing. We're processing. The word I use when someone dies is they vaporize. Like, how did that happen? They were right here, and they vaporized. They're atoms now. We are trying so hard to understand that. So we will do all these things to kind of work through how we're going to deal with this person gone. So yeah, I think the quilts are beautiful. And I've seen many quilts. My sister happens to be a professional quilter, so she kind of takes it to the limit. Mm-hmm. You know, we've seen lots of different kinds of quilts. Thank you for talking about quilts. Anybody else have a quick thought? I see you back there. Do you want to? I'll repeat it if you shout it at me.
I want to know why I don't hear today the word mourning.
You know.
And one more.
Yeah.
That I've been hearing recently often, transition.
Well, the word mourning, I've always wondered about that word, so I've looked it up. So the dictionary, sort of the way it works, is mourning is what we do to show we are in grief. So back in the old days, we had a black ribbon on our shoulder, or the Sicilian women across the street from where I grew up wore black my whole childhood. They were in mourning. So mourning is an outward expression of grief. And when we're grieving, we're doing an internal process. And the word transition, I don't know if there's a transition. The word transition, I never actually usually see in these books. People say to you, have you moved on? Are you moving on? And maybe they think you're transitioning, but you can just look at them and say, I'm not talking to you right now, buddy. You know, there's the idea that you've moved on is so much a part of our culture, and that people might use the word transition to suggest, hey, you're not going to be this soupy, sappy, sad sack anymore. Now I can take you to a party. And maybe you transitioned. But I remember going to a tutorial at a college where I was supposed to learn how the kids had these little reading discussion groups, and we were doing Odysseus and his wife Penelope waited 10 years for him to show up, and she was in grief the whole time. And I said in this group, I said, nobody's in grief for 10 years. And this woman sat back in her chair and she said, my aunt is still in grief for her husband, and it's more than 10 years. And I was like, okay, I don't know anything about grief. You know, if you've never met grief, honestly, you don't know anything about grief. It's mind-boggling. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted
Go there.
I just wanted to give a quick plug for another art project for grievers. Our Wheel Homeless Women's Group does a homeless remembrance project, which includes bronze leaves of remembrance.
Oh, I know that they have a website.
Yeah, right.
And they have them.
You can go to fallenleaves.org.
That's right.
And there is a page on fallenleaves.org for every person that has a leaf, and they have their own stories.
And there you can see them down by Pike Place Market in the park named Peter Steinbrook.
The Steinbrook
The Steinbrook Park, that's where the Tree of Life is.
Exactly.
With the fallen leaves.
Yes, but these are all, everyone in this room is capable of generating some way to memorialize, to love, to share. You don't need a big project. You certainly don't need 112 books on a table. But I'd love you to, after we are finished, to come on over here, and if you are in need of some kind of support, we'll see if we have a book. We'll see if there's something that can be useful. There's lots of books that didn't come tonight. I brought 3 of everything. Here's my friend. What's your question?
So I know that with my personal death experience, I was like I still to this day have like a really hard time coping with the guilt of it. Like the feeling of not doing enough, or maybe it wouldn't have happened.
I know you've talked to me about survivor guilt. Yeah. Survivor guilt is incredibly real. And sadly, I think some of this goes right into the therapist's office, because I know that we all feel we should have done more, however it goes down. You lose someone, you know, it's crazy. Somebody dies in a car accident, you think, why didn't I spend another 5 minutes having coffee with them, right? It has nothing to do with you. You are not guilty. But you will always find a reason to feel that you could have done. Yes, absolutely. I can't answer it, Alaya. I really can't, survivor guilt, because I'm just not in the professional game. I can sure talk about grief, though, right?
So we are coming to the end, but I just want to say that sometimes that question of survivor's guilt comes up. I associated initially with some of the experiences from war experiences, but that it's part of how that can change is for people to take on a survivor's mission, which is what they do since they are here. And I'm thinking about what an extraordinary mission this is for you. And I don't know that you think of yourself as having a mission, but this is an extraordinary opportunity that you've given other people.
Thank you.
Please, I want to honor our time. Please do come look at the books, understand the code colors. We've got
All of our
Cecily back there
dots.
to help us. And thank you for taking the time and being with us. And I wish you well in your journeys.
Yeah.